Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. The MF Global scandal, we've been talking about it for a couple of shows now. It's becoming more of a festering sore on the collapsing global economy. Stacy Herbert, what's the latest?
Hi, Max Keiser. Well, the latest is the entire system has been utterly destroyed by the MF Global collapse, presenting the first MF Global casualty. Yes, Max has Barnard Capital Management, and they've ceased operations. And in their letter to clients, they say the reason for the decision to pull the plug was excruciatingly simple. I could no longer tell my clients that their monies and positions were safe in the futures and options markets, because they are not. The entire system has been utterly destroyed by the MF Global collapse. He goes on to say, what was the surprise was the reaction of the exchanges and regulators. Their reaction has been to take a bad situation and make it orders of magnitude worse. Specifically, they froze customers out of their accounts while the markets continued to trade, refusing even allow them to liquidate.
Well, it's not unprecedented on the branch level, as I've been explaining. The individual branches of brokerages with the compliance officer and the trader within eyeball distance of each other, there's a tremendous amount of fraud that goes on. This is more of an institutionalized fraud where the regulatory agencies themselves, like the CME, are acting like a corrupt branch compliance officer. For the same reason, they take huge amounts of bribes under the table, a lot of cash under the money. I've witnessed plenty of money, bribe cash paid off to CME folks and regulators. I mean, it's standard business operating procedure. But the central banking system and the government believes that this is what's required to maintain liquidity. But with the global economy collapsing, and you have nothing left but fraud, this is very typical of the end of a Ponzi scheme, because as people pull their money out of the system, Stacy, that's the new money that you need to keep the Ponzi scheme going. So if people are going to pull out of the Ponzi scheme, then we really do have a big problem. This could be much bigger than Lehman Brothers, because it really would attack the kernel of the systemic system that's now at risk due to just too much fraud. And the CMA Group, as we've been reporting for quite some time, one of the most fraudulent regulators in the world. That's the way the system works, and it's benefited people until now it's killing people.
Okay, Max. Well, the reason why he says it's very unfathomable is that the CME Group would typically provide the liquidity in this case. When a group member like MF Global goes bankrupt, normally the CME Group would provide the liquidity and make sure that the funds were still flowing. Now, they didn't in this case, and the speculation is that if they backed MF Global, then others were behind it and that they couldn't possibly afford that. So we've covered the story that Barnard Capital Management out of the game because of MF Global. Now, talk about the cooked game, Max. The Koch brothers and MF Global, friends to the end. Daniel Dicker, an oil trader and CNBC contributor, wrote on the Huffington Post that on October 3rd, Koch brothers pulled out billions from MF Global. They had 8 accounts with MF Global and had them for decades. Just like Gerald Celente had his account for decades, and he lost all of his money. The Koch brothers managed October 3rd. They were warned that this was coming down. They pulled their billions. They saved their billions. And the article from Daniel Dicker on Huffington Post says, quote, for those still battling the excesses of 2008 and those occupying Wall Street, this has been another proof of the inside fixed operation of the financial markets. When banks go wrong, betting big with other people's money and losing, they can be sure of a bailout that guarantees their bonuses and businesses. And when firms are tailspinning to disaster, the richest and most financially influential partners are sure to get a phone call, a heads up, to save their assets and leave regular people with the mess.
Yes. Insider trading, once again, drawing on my experience as a Wall Street broker myself, many times it's called getting the first call. If you're on a first call basis with the firm, you get the first call when you need to get the first call. And that applies to research recommendations. It applies to this type of scandal that's about to break. That costs a lot of money, a lot of bribe, a lot of graft. But it's worth it because you avoid these types of losses. Again, it's the way the system works. It's the way the entire industry is built. There's the clients who are on the privilege. Within, people are debating this 99 versus 1%. Within the 1%, there's the 99 and 1%. So you have to be really at the 1% of the 1%, like the Koch brothers, to get the first call. If you're not in that group, you shouldn't be anywhere near any of these trading exchanges because you're going to lose everything.
Well, and the other interesting thing, Max, is that, of course, the Koch brothers finance the Tea Party, which is considered the protest group of the right. Now, you have the Occupy Wall Street crowd that is being painted as the protest group of the left. And yet, interestingly, we always talk about this fake right-left paradigm, this red state, blue state thing that happens in America. But those top 0.1%, the 1% of the 1%, they're on the same team. They work together. John Corzine helped the Koch brothers. Theoretically, they're on opposite sides, right? They claim. But at the end of the day, no matter what side you're a partisan member of, you get shellacked if you're the bottom 99.9%.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, it's simply not going to stop until the peasants realize that they're peasants. I mean, America is a nation of 329 million peasants, and they need a proper peasant revolt, but they don't want to think of themselves as peasants, so they're delaying, they're deferring the inevitable.
Well, Max, we are in London, and it is the home of the peasant revolt, the failed peasant revolt, I might say. It usually fails throughout history. The big one in 1381, that failed. The one successful one, of course, was in 1990, the poll tax riots, which traced the trail of the 1381 peasant revolt, ending in, right behind you, the Battle of Trafalgar. Now, let's move to the UK, these stories against the peasants. Virgin Money buys Northern Rock for £747 million. Yes, Virgin Money has agreed to buy the good part of Northern Rock from the Treasury for around half of what the taxpayer injected into the bank when it split last year.
Right, well, it puts a lie to this notion that the taxpayers are going to be paid back for these bailouts. The taxpayers are going to get massive losses, and somebody like Richard Branson gets a massive gift because he can chew gum and walk at the same time. That's Richard Branson's gift to the business world. He doesn't trip over his shoelaces. He's not technically, you know, mentally deficient like so much of the banking system in the UK. So they throw him multi-billion-dollar gift and say, oh, we love your blonde hair and big shiny teeth. Can you make our banks look like they're not corrupt? We'll give you one for $1 billion gift, Richard Branson. And so he's just sitting there laying, yeah, I'll take the gift, you know, sure. But you don't need to have a blonde-haired, shiny-toothed guy come in with $1 billion pound gift. You can actually just have a regular competitive bank set up in 20 minutes online. It doesn't take a genius to figure it out. But the government here is, you know, Cameron is just so full of himself, and he can't see past his own disingenuousness. He's just like an origami that's folded up in the contortions of his own lies. And he's total betrayal to his class, his people, the institutions he's supposed to be representing, and Cameron just walks in and takes all the free money off the floor. It's a disgrace.
Well, the Daily Mail about this story reports that after its state takeover, Northern Rock was split into two parts, a solvent good bank and a bad bank, which took on the company's riskier liabilities, totaling around £21 billion, which taxpayers may never get back. So I like that they call it the riskier liabilities, i.e. those assets that are worth nothing. They're worth zero on the dollar, on the pound in this case, and that's 21 billion pounds worth that the taxpayer is stuck with. Richard Branson gets the good assets. He gets it for half price of what the taxpayer put in. It's worth a whole lot more than £500 million.
Right. The so-called bad bank concept, they have it on their books at a certain value, which they don't use mark-to-market accounting. They say that the assets on the bad bank's balance sheets are worth 100 cents on the dollar. We know that they're worth 0 cents on the dollar. You see this in countries all over the world, particularly famously Nama in Ireland. They have this bad bank where the assets are supposed to be worth something, but they're actually worth nothing. Same thing in the UK. Same thing with Northern Rock. So they've got a bad bank. The assets are worth nothing. Simply write off the bad debts that the bankers made. If they can't pay the bad debts that they made, then they need to be punished in some way. Take them off, get them out of the banking business for one thing. Why do they continue in the banking business if they've already proven that they are nothing but larcenistic, leeching thieves? Oh, because they support Cameron. And Cameron has leeches covering his body, sucking his soul out every second of every day. And he's up there in the House of Commons like a zombie, treacherous little morphed out piglet saying nonsense.
Well, Max, finally let's show you this headline here. Millions to lose out as benefits are curbed. So there's going to be £1 billion in benefits cut, and because the benefits are no longer going to be linked to inflation. So this is what you call financial repression. Some might call it financial oppression. And like the peasants' revolt of past, they're dividing the peasants they're playing them off against each other, because pensioners will continue to have inflation-linked rises in their benefits, but disabled people, unemployed, they'll no longer have benefits linked to inflation. So, and the cuts are quite significant, that how much they're going to cut from their benefits.
Right. Well, they're turning disabled people into a permanent underclass in Britain. You know, back to the Victorian age, where they put mentally deficient or disabled people in institutions, threw away the key, and they rotted. Okay, they're going to reopen those institutions, put the disabled people back in there, and let them rot to death, because they don't have any money for them, because Cameron's a pig.
Well, Max, they do note that, you know, the problem is that normally benefits are linked to what inflation is in September, and that was 5.25%. And the reason why we have 5.25% inflation, Max?
Well, because of all the money printing to bail out the banks. Quantitative easing is money printing, bails out banks, but the banks don't re-lend the money, but they do invest in speculative plays like commodities, forcing energy and food to go higher, which is causing impoverishment.
And this is the intent. If you go to the Bank of England website, they actually state this, essentially the intent of quantitative easing. It is in order to basically take your savings and transfer it to the bankers. So here you have it, disabled people paying for the crimes of the bankers, and yet on the other hand you get $500 million. The same cost savings that they have with this austerity measure, they basically just transferred to Richard Branson in the same week.
Well, it's an excellent point, Stacy Herbert. If you work through the math and you put a few of these deals, line them up, and you blow away the smoke and the mirrors, you see that billions in austerity taken out of the pockets of folks who rightfully are owed this money if interest rates reflected something other than financial oppression, and they put it into the pocket of Richard Branson because he's got blonde hair and shiny teeth. I suggest everyone in Britain dye their hair blonde and get big shiny teeth, and you too can be a billionaire. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report. Don't dye your hair, though. You're perfect.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned. Much more coming your way, so stay right there.
A journey the length of life. A desire for the best of things. A hunger that drowns out our inner world. The story of one man who returns home after years of alienation. Kalmykia, the monk's white path on RT.
A very warm welcome to you. This is your news today. And protesters on Wall Street, they...
Ladies and gentlemen, you're tuned in to the Juice News set again, where we're examining the status of the human experiment. Is it succeeding or will it have to be aborted? We pursue a prognosis in this rap news audit. As you know, the globe is urgently trying to make sense of our global economy and its arcane trends as financial temples teeter. The priesthood is scrambling to maintain our confidence in markets and banking after derivatives, quantitative easing, trade imbalances, recession, low GDP, nations close to collapsing, and subprime loans, foreclosed homes, and people's taxes spent to bailouts and big to fail AAA banks again. Fear levels rising as the US crash seems imminent, having smashed the debt ceiling of 14 trillion despite protests and clashes in Athens streets. The IMF imposed structurally unjust programs in Greece, where in fact the term economy...
Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Let's turn to Richard Thomas. He's an independent radio journalist. Richard Thomas, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hello, Max. Pleasure to talk to you.
All right, Richard, you've been reporting from Occupy LSX, the London Stock Exchange, since it began. Tell us how the occupation began, where it stands today in terms of the concerns and lists of demands or goals.
Okay, so it started on October 15th. There was an announcement to take the London Stock Exchange in Paternoster Square. I heard this idea floated about a week beforehand when UK Uncut and other activists staged an occupation of Westminster Bridge in an attempt to thwart government attempts to fully privatise the National Health Service, I guess.
All right, so let me just cut in there for a second because, of course, the Occupy movement, it came down to America from Canada, from the Adbusters organization. It started on Wall Street, and then it fanned out all over the world. And
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, I think the thing that identifies itself as the Occupy movement is obviously North American, perhaps, in origin. But of course, I mean, I think it goes back further, doesn't it? I mean, it goes back to the M15 movement in Madrid and Barcelona, which was in turn inspired, of course, by events in Tahrir Square in Egypt, and so on. And I think it's the mimetic influence of the Arab Spring, really, and the way that's sort of bled into Europe. Then going across the Atlantic, then the Occupy movement happening in Wall Street and Zuccotti Park, and then it pinging back here. I think that, as far as I'm aware, I think to a certain extent there's also other hands involved here as well. I think UK Uncut have got, at least if nothing else, an advisory role to play here. Of course, they're also experts at the occupation of space.
Well, let me ask you this. I've been visiting with some of the demonstrators and protesters here at Occupy UK. It seems very much of going to a gunfight with a knife. The protesters themselves don't understand really the nature of the enemy that they're attacking. There's a headline out today talking about how the entire crisis in the Eurozone is just playing into Goldman Sachs' hands because Goldman Sachs is now putting their apparatchiks in charge of Italy, in charge of Greece. They're active in Ireland. They'll be active in Spain. So they're just strengthening their hand. If anything, they're using this chaos to just strengthen their hand outright. Going back a couple of decades, I remember in apartheid South Africa, it wasn't until there was a full-on global boycott of Barclays Bank that, in fact, the world stood up and there was some progress made. Do these various global movements need to consolidate and create some economies of scale and really go on a global basis? Because right now they're doing it piecemeal and they're losing.
I don't think that's true at all. I mean, I think it is happening on a global scale. I also think it's wrong to homogenise and those involved in the occupation. As far as I've experienced it, either go in there in a journalistic capacity or, of course, go in there out of interest and socialising. It's a very, 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 forgive the sort of pun here, broad church. There are people who are liberal reformists, they want capitalism to be adjusted, and there are those that want to completely smash the state, you know. It's really very broad. And there are a lot of people who are finding themselves and finding each other and are developing the critique that they innately feel. But I think the naivety that you might find present too is something that's been kind of like remarked upon, and I think naivety is a really good thing. I think it means that you come into a situation with a fresh pair of eyes. You don't know how to behave and you're learning. I also think that it might be erroneous to strike too much of a comparison with what it's like to sort of live under apartheid. I do agree that there is definitely a disparity between those with wealth and those without, but I think it's a slightly different situation from...
Well, we do see a form of financial apartheid. If you're in the top 1%, for example, your cost of funds is 0 or less than 0. If you're not in the top 1%, your cost of funds would be 35%, upwards of 350% with these payday loans. So it's a bit of a financial apartheid or a financial oppression. But I want to go back to 1990 to the poll tax riots here in the UK, because this is when the UK population really stood up, rose up, and pushed back against the Thatcher-era regulations and initiatives of that time. And are we heading back, do you think, in the near term to something as volatile as that, Richard Thomas?
Yes, we've already been there, and let's not forget, you know, the magical moment when the fourth wall was broken at Millbank. the journalist Dan Hancock's referred to it as the shattering of the glass of capitalist realism, I think. Let's not forget the momentous events that took place in August this year. I believe it was August or July, the London riots. We're already there, you know. You wait until austerity measures really kick in hard, when people have had their benefits taken, when they basically can't afford to eat. People are going to really kick off. People are capable of great volatility, and they have no faith in the institutions of power.
I noticed when I mentioned those two words, poll tax, suddenly the energy level just skyrockets, and people are very nostalgic for this moment in recent British history when the people... Now, let me ask you the question. I was talking to Stacy Herbert earlier in the show, and she mentioned, and she did a little analysis of how the cutbacks in entitlements in the UK, if you added them all up, and then the gift that the UK government is giving Richard Branson to take over Northern Rock, you can see that the government is basically taking money out of the people that were rioting due to their mistreatment by the government, and they're putting that money directly into the pocket of Richard Branson. How can this government get away with just transferring wealth directly from the lowest on the social ladders directly into the pockets to the highest?
I don't know. It's astonishing, and it's a lose-lose situation. I don't understand it. I mean, the austerity budget is removing benefits, shutting down social services. There's no growth. There's no job creation. There's like 1 million people, young people, unemployed at the moment, and there is nowhere to go, and they've got nothing to lose. So people will kick off. But they're fed up with the crap, vulgar reality that's foisted upon them anyway, and they're fed up with the crap, drab, weak, precarious future that's foisted upon them as well. You know what? You know, you're really going to be excited about maybe working in a retail store on a 6-month at best contract for the rest of, you know what I mean? People, before Cameron was even elected, you know, I think people start to question what reality is and how, and with the kind of reality they want. And now with this extra kind of absolutely brutal kamikaze-like attack on public services, people are going to get more and more angry, I would hope anyway. And, you know, it's their civic responsibility. It's one's civic responsibility.
Yeah. Well, there's an underlying economic case to be made. Public services, by the government participating on the wholesale level to provide services to a majority of the population, you end up increasing your GDP because there's some economies of scale there. And public services are not, it's not socialism, it's part of a dynamic economy attempting to create a meritocracy in a pro-competition environment by cutting off your future entrepreneurs by simply, killing them in the cradle. Essentially, is what Cameron is doing. He's committing babyicide on the next generation of entrepreneurs in favor of the Richard Branson who's got a gun to Cameron's head and says, "Give me £500 million as a gift, or we're going to take down another portion of the European economy." But without the London being the center of the global money laundering rackets and the global banking fraudsters, of course, the UK economy would have no growth at all. Do you think if the UK government, particularly Cameron, is not going to chase down, terrorists, like, for example, the financial terrorists that destroyed Iceland currently have safe harbor in London, while Julian Assange is being deported? Of course, Cameron lets these terrorists have safe harbor in London. Should Cameron, should he go after the terrorists, or is terrorism just too much part of the economy here in the UK? You can't get rid of it without destroying everything. I
think you have to take really, you can't just pursue the terrorists in some sort of symbolic way. I mean, it's not just those individuals, is it? It's the system in which perpetuated their corruption. And it's the system that has to be dismantled. And that includes the system within which people like David Cameron are not acting or acting. The thing about Occupy, the thing about St. Paul's, the thing about Zuccotti Park, the thing about Oakland, the thing about Portland, the thing about Tahrir, the thing about Madrid, the thing about Barcelona, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other occupations. Also, it's worth mentioning there's a lot of other occupations occurring in public spaces around the UK. Is that whether it's about the 1% or the 99%, it is obviously core to why we're talking today. But I think the other fundamental and sort of real interesting aspect of it is what it's about. Is people want, they're not docile proles. They want a much more kinetic, dynamic, persistent, active engagement with politics. But not necessarily the form of politics that are currently available to us. I mean, if you think about it, the binary kind of parliamentary model we have feels like such an anachronism in a world where you crowdsource your entertainment. I mean, the idea that you, as is the case now, as Clegg and Cameron announced there'd be fixed-term 5-year governments, to sit and wait to choose between A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, it sounds like paper, it's not, the versions of the same boring, drab, centrist kind of capitalist ideological factions, it is not satisfying to people.
Yeah, let me cut in there for a second. We've got about a minute left, and I want you to comment on what you see happening in the next couple of years on the culture side, because of course during the Thatcher era, the culture, the music, in particular in the UK, was explosive and world-beating. Gave us, of course, the Sex Pistols and the Clash and other fantastic acts of that era. Are we heading into a cultural renaissance as a result of this this financial terrorism in the UK?
What's going to happen in terms of visual arts? I think you'll see more collective art practice because it makes sense to collectively work on a project and to collectively occupy a space. So I can imagine much more shared studios and so on. In terms of music, I think there's an awful lot of interesting, very engaged political with a lowercase p. What you also want is a radical rethinking of form and a radical re-engagement with aesthetics. You know, what purpose does music serve? In terms of questioning political and economic structures, the same thing probably needs to go on within music as well as somehow.
Right, this concentration of wealth over the past 20 or 30 years has squeezed out artists in a lot of sense and has collapsed, and it's going to require artists ultimately to rebuild society and save the backsides of these financial terrorists, as it always has been throughout history. The artists ultimately are always the ones to carry the ball for civilization going forward. Okay, Richard Thomas, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks very much.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Richard Thomas. If you want to send me an email, do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Follow me on Twitter, Max Keiser. You can follow Stacy Herbert, too, on Twitter, but follow me on Twitter. Until next time, Max Keiser saying, bye, y'all.